The sound was so soft, just a whisper of metal teeth finding each other. Yet it echoed through me like a door slamming shut behind the person I used to be. I stood there in my bedroom, heart hammering, staring at the mirror I'd avoided for years. It had always been an ordinary mirror, framed in dark wood, slightly warped at the edges, but that night it felt like a witness. Or a judge. I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. Not because the transformation was perfect. It wasn't. My hands trembled, my makeup was cautious and uneven, and the dress, navy blue, modest, falling just below the knees, hung on me with a tentative grace. But something in my eyes had shifted. A softness. A question answered. For as long as I could remember, I had been orbiting this moment. Circling it. Pretending it wasn't there. The mirror and I had played a silent game for years. I would glance at it while brushing my teeth, adjusting my tie, rehearsing the version of myself the world expected. It reflected a man. A decent one, by most measures. Stable job. Quiet demeanor. The kind of person who blends into the background of office meetings and family gatherings. But at night, when the house was still and the world loosened its grip, I would stand in front of that same mirror and feel an absence I couldn't name. The first time I tried on women's clothing, I told myself it was curiosity. A private experiment. I had found the dress at a small thrift store across town where no one knew me. I remember how my hands shook as I carried it to the counter, folded so neatly it looked like any other purchase. The cashier didn't look twice. That hurt and relieved me at the same time. At home, I hid it in the back of my closet behind old winter coats. For days, I pretended it didn't exist. But I could feel it there, like a secret humming in the dark. When I finally slipped it on, I expected shame to swallow me whole. I expected guilt, maybe disgust. Instead, I felt quiet. Like a room in my mind that had been locked for years had just been opened and aired out. Still, I told myself it was temporary. A phase. Something to be folded away, like the dress itself. But the mirror never forgot. Each time I returned to it, adding a bracelet, trying a different blouse, experimenting with how my hair might fall if I let it grow longer, the reflection grew steadier. Less like a costume, more like a confession. And confessions, once spoken, have consequences. The night of the zipper, I had gone further than ever before. Makeup carefully applied, not as a joke or exaggeration, but with respect. I watched tutorial videos in secret, learning how to soften angles, how to blend, how to let my face tell a different story. When I brushed mascara onto my lashes, my hands were steadier than they had any right to be. I kept thinking this is the last time. Just one more experiment. But the mirror didn't show an experiment. It showed alignment. My breath fogged the glass as I stepped closer. I traced my reflection's cheek with trembling fingers, stopping just short of touching the surface. I didn't see a caricature. I didn't see something ridiculous. I saw someone who looked relieved. That realization scared me more than anything. Because relief meant this wasn't a game. Relief meant there had been tension all along. And tension implies truth. I thought about my parents, who had raised me with quiet expectations. Not harsh, not cruel, just certain. I thought about my friends at work, the casual jokes, the assumptions. I thought about the version of myself I had carefully maintained for decades, built brick by brick out of what was acceptable. And here I was, standing barefoot in my bedroom, wrapped in navy fabric, feeling more authentic than I ever had in a tailored suit. I crossed a line. I whispered to the mirror. But the person staring back didn't look ashamed. They looked alive. The next morning, I folded the dress carefully and placed it back in the closet. My hands lingered on the fabric as if it might disappear if I let go. I went to work in my usual attire, but something had shifted inside me. The office felt louder, brighter. Every conversation felt like I was speaking through a thin wall. When a coworker clapped me on the shoulder and joked about being one of the guys, I smiled automatically. But inside, something recoiled. The phrase felt like a costume I'd outgrown overnight. All day, the mirror haunted me. Not the physical one, but the image of it. The calm in those eyes. The undeniable sense of rightness. I realized the line I had crossed wasn't about clothing. It was about acknowledgement. And once you acknowledge something that fundamental, you can't unknow it. That evening, I didn't hesitate. I locked my door, drew the curtains, and returned to the closet. The dress slid over my shoulders more easily this time. My breathing slowed instead of spiking. When I faced the mirror again, I didn't flinch. But this time, a new emotion surfaced. Fear. Because the reflection no longer felt like a secret indulgence. It felt like a direction. And directions lead somewhere. I stared at myself for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the room, the faint ticking of the clock on my wall. I imagined stepping outside like this, walking down the street, hearing my footsteps on pavement, feeling eyes on me. My chest tightened. Could I survive that? Could I survive never trying? The mirror didn't answer. It simply waited. The first time I said her name out loud, my voice cracked. I hadn't planned to choose one. I told myself that names were too serious, too final, like carving something into stone. But as I stood in front of the mirror again, dress smoothing over my hips, hair brushed differently, posture subtly altered, the silence between us felt incomplete. The reflection needed more than my borrowed pronouns. It needed recognition. I tried a few in whispers, testing how they felt in my mouth. Some sounded theatrical. Some felt like costumes. Then one slipped out softly, almost by accident. And when it did, my shoulders dropped. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It was simple, gentle. It felt like something I had always known but never allowed myself to say. I repeated it again, firmer this time. Hi. The mirror didn't laugh. Instead, something in my chest loosened, and for the first time in my life, I introduced myself to myself. The emotional weight of that moment hit harder than the dress ever had. Clothing could be folded away. Makeup could be wiped off. But a name? A name was a claim. I paced my room afterward, heart racing, as if I had just committed a crime. What was I doing? Was this too far? Was I spiraling into something irreversible? That phrase again. Irreversible. I used to think the line I couldn't uncross was the zipper. Now I realized it was the name. Because once you call something into existence, it stops being imaginary. Over the next week, I began carving out small, secret spaces where she could exist. 10 minutes before bed. 20 minutes on a Sunday afternoon. I practiced walking differently, not exaggerated, not theatrical, just allowing my body to move without the stiffness I'd learned over years of standing like a man. I softened my gestures when I was alone. I let my wrists relax. I stopped monitoring the pitch of my laughter. The mirror became less of a judge and more of a confidant. But outside my bedroom, the world stayed the same. At work, I felt hyper-aware of everything. The way my coworkers leaned back in their chairs, the casual talk about sports, the subtle hierarchy of masculinity that floated through conversations. I had participated in it for years without thinking. Now it felt like I was studying a culture I had once belonged to. One afternoon, during lunch, someone made a joke about a man on TV who looked like he couldn't decide what he was. The table erupted in laughter. I forced a smile, but my stomach nodded. I wasn't offended in the loud, explosive way I imagined people should be. I was wounded quietly, like a hairline fracture, because I knew exactly what it felt like to not be able to decide. That night, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. I searched my reflection for certainty, for a label, for something concrete. But what I saw instead was vulnerability, and it terrified me. I had always thought strength meant fitting in seamlessly, being unremarkable, unquestioned. Now I was beginning to suspect that strength might actually mean standing in front of a mirror and not looking away. Still, doubt crept in. What if this was escapism? What if I was just lonely? What if I was manufacturing an identity because my life felt too small? I leaned closer to the glass, studying my own eyes. They didn't look confused. They looked patient. That scared me more than anything. Patience implied longevity. It implied that this wasn't a passing curiosity. It implied that the person in the mirror had been waiting, quietly, persistently for years. I reached up and touched the edge of the frame, grounding myself. "I can't do this forever in secret," I whispered. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Because secrets have gravity. The longer you carry them, the heavier they become. And mine was beginning to bend my spine. The next escalation came unexpectedly. It was a Saturday evening, rain tapping against the windows, when I realized I was tired of the bedroom. Tired of confinement. The dress no longer felt like a costume. It felt like a promise half-kept. Before I could talk myself out of it, I slipped on a light cardigan, grabbed my keys, and walked toward the front door. My pulse pounded in my ears. This was absurd. Reckless. I could just turn around. No one had to know. But my hand was already on the doorknob. The mirror in the hallway caught me one last time before I left. Full length. Unfiltered. The lighting harsher than my bedroom's forgiving glow. I looked real. Not perfect. Not unnoticeable. But real. I swallowed hard and opened the door. The cool evening air brushed against my skin differently than it ever had before. Every sensation felt amplified. The fabric against my legs, the sound of my footsteps, the distant hum of traffic. I didn't walk far, just around the block. But each step felt like crossing another invisible line. A car drove past. My heart leapt into my throat. Did they look? Did they notice? I kept my gaze forward, breathing shallowly. And then something unexpected happened. Nothing. No shouting. No laughter. No confrontation. The world continued as if I had always belonged in it. By the time I returned home, my legs were shaking, not from humiliation, but from adrenaline. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, exhaling in a rush. I had done it. A small step. A tiny rebellion. But it felt monumental. I hurried to the hallway mirror again, half expecting the reflection to scold me for my recklessness. Instead, she looked proud. A fragile, cautious pride, but pride nonetheless. And in that quiet hallway, with rain still falling outside, I realized the line I couldn't uncross wasn't about appearance. It was about courage.